access to trade into GB.
And the way of attracting foreign investment, it's for a foreign investor, has the best of both worlds.
Exactly. So,
why can't the DUP, why can't unionism say, this is what we must sell?
Well, you see, Arlene Foster attempted to do this last October, November, and then was sat upon by Sammy Wilson and et al. I mean, it's interesting. It's actually the line which let me get the right way around. What's the Northern Ireland Investment Board, whatever they're called, the IDB, isn't that what they're called? Yes, Industrial Development Board. That's the line that they are putting out to foreign investors. Yet they have a minister in charge of the economy who is saying the exact opposite. So, both the DUP and Sinn Féin are on the horns of a dilemma.
One other thing you said of interest was that we have to have a discussion on the legacy of the past.
Yes.
Why are legacy issues been so difficult to put to rest?
Well, I think that I used to do talks about this, and I said, look, one of the things we've got to recognize is we never have come to an agreement as to what actually we call this place. We've never come to an agreement on what actually we called the conflict. Was it the Troubles? Was it an armed insurrection? Were they freedom fighters? Were they terrorists? We also, I remember when Bill Clinton went to Vietnam, and it was, I think actually it was just either before or just after he was here. And it was hailed as how great this was, because here was the American president going to Vietnam, and it was part of the healing between the US and Vietnam. I thought, yeah, it's very good. But that was across the other side of the world. Particularly where I am sitting in County Armagh, we are dealing with situations where neighbour shot neighbour. Where you could be the relative of someone who was killed in the conflict, and you could be walking down your local street and you could meet either the person who you believed or the person who did shoot your relative, or a relative of the person who shot your relative, or indeed the person who may have fingered your relative. So it is very, particularly in rural communities, it is very local. While all politics is local, our conflict was very local. And while we have, for example, the whole hype around the Bobby Storey funeral and the continued position taken by Sinn Féin that it was a justified armed struggle, and that everybody who was practically in the security forces was colluding with loyalist paramilitaries. It is extremely difficult to get a position where we will agree on very much. I think that the most we can get to is the sort of agreement that came out of Stormont House, where I also think, and the Alliance Party doesn't agree with this yet, but I think increasingly we're going to reach a position where there is going to be some form of amnesty, because the idea of actually having convictions of people is getting, it's so long ago that and people who are holding out for convictions are offering something that is untenable to people. And I think there are plenty of models in other parts of the world where there have been far worse conflicts than ours, namely the Balkans and other places like that, where there is signs of healing, and I think there is international support which is available through groups like the International Coalition of the Sites of Conscience, which would provide various mechanisms, which could be finding facts about what occurred, but without prosecutions, and various forms of commemoration and oral history projects and material like that. But those things are they're also generational. The danger is if we don't do it,
yes,
as has occurred in the past, we don't heal it. It remains there as a festering wound, which is capable of being restarted.
So
it is interesting. It is interesting that it is only now, actually, that with the decade of centenaries, that there has been a recording of all the deaths that occurred from 1916 right through to 1925. And the telling of the stories of those deaths in a similar way to the book Lost Lives did inside with our own conflict. And that is to be commended. Is
that a project, Will?
That is a project that has been undertaken. Professor Ewan O'Halpin from TCD is one of the people involved, has been leading it.
Who?
Ewan O'Halpin.
No, I don't. What, could you spell that?
He's a history professor in UCD, or sorry, TCD, Trinity.
Yeah, UNO?
Ewan, EUAN O apostrophe HALPIN.
Okay, thank you. Let me just finish off with you. Who else should I be talking to? Just throw some names at me and I'll see. I've conducted about 60 interviews now.
Right.
I'm aiming for at least 100.
Right. Have you spoken to Paul Nolan?
Yes.
Right.
It was great.
Ruth Moore.
Ruth Lure, no.
Ruth Moore. She is a community worker, artist, lives in Fermanagh, has been involved in community and community relations work for considerable periods of time, comes from, her parents would have been Free Presbyterian and Paisleyite, and she is decidedly not.
Moore, M-O-R-E?
M-O-R-R-E, yeah, yeah, right. Charmaine Jones, who works for Rural Community Network as a community relations worker. Again, is from a Protestant background.
Again, that is Sean?
Charmaine, it's C-H-A-R-M-A-I-N. Jones.
Jones?
Jones, J-O-N-E-S. She worked for Rural Community Network. Kate Turner, who has worked for Healing Through Remembering, who has dealt an awful lot to deal with the past. Bran Walsh, the County Louth Museum. Eamon Dean.
Sorry?
Eamon Dean, Hollywell Trust. Derry.
That's great.